September 9th, 1957. Paramount Studios, Culver City, California. 8:45 in the morning. Three women walked through the main entrance of the Thalberg building together, which was the first thing that confused the security guard at the front desk. They had been scheduled as separate appointments, staggered 30 minutes apart, the way the studio always arranged meetings with talent to prevent any sense of collective identity, any feeling that the people walking through these doors had anything in common with each other beyond their usefulness to Paramount Pictures. But here they were, arriving together, at the same time, without explanation or apology. The woman in front was Audrey Hepburn, 28 years old, already an Academy Award winner, already the most photographed face in the world. She wore a simple black dress and carried a single leather folder against her chest. Behind her walked Ava Gardner, 34 years old, daughter of North Carolina sharecroppers. The woman MGM had once described in a studio memo as raw material transformed into gold, as if she had been something unformed and worthless before they got their hands on her. And beside Ava walked Barbara Stanwyck, 50 years old, the veteran, the woman who had survived silent films and talkies and the golden age, and every transition Hollywood had thrown at her for 3 decades, surviving every single one on nothing but talent and the refusal to pretend she was anything less than extraordinary. The security guard picked up his telephone to announce their arrival. Barbara placed her hand gently over his before he could dial. "We know where we're going," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then slowly put the phone down. There was something in her voice that made arguing feel pointless. They walked past him toward the elevator without waiting for an escort. Conference Room A was on the 3rd floor, east side of the building, overlooking the studio lot where Stage 12 was already alive with activity for an early morning shoot. 9 men sat on one side of a 14-foot conference table. Richard Holloway, head of Paramount Production, sat at the center, flanked by 4 lawyers and 4 senior executives, all of them in gray or navy suits, all of them holding pens, all of them radiating the particular confidence of men who had sat in this room hundreds of times and always gotten what they came for. 3 chairs sat empty on the opposite side of the table. 3 contracts sat in front of those chairs, bound in the same black leather with gold embossing that Paramount used for all major talent agreements. Standard 7-year deals. Same terms as always. Holloway had reviewed them that morning and found nothing unusual. This was supposed to be a formality. Audrey, Ava, and Barbara sat down without greeting anyone. The silence was immediate and different from what Holloway had expected. When talent came to these meetings, they were usually nervous, usually grateful, usually performing some version of casual confidence that poorly masked their awareness that the people across the table held their futures in their hands. These 3 women were none of those things. They sat the way people sit when they are exactly where they intended to be. Holloway smiled the smile he used to begin negotiations, warm and practiced. "Ladies, thank you for coming in. I think you'll find these new agreements very generous. We've increased the base compensation across the board, and we've included some exciting new production commitments that I think you're going to be very pleased with." He gestured toward the 3 contracts. "I just need your signatures, and we can have you out of here before lunch." Audrey Hepburn picked up all 3 contracts without opening any of them. She handed them to Barbara on her left. Barbara passed them to Ava on her right. Ava set them on the edge of the table with careful, deliberate precision, her movements slow enough that every person in the room understood she was not rushing, was not nervous, was doing exactly what she meant to do. Then she pushed them off the edge. The 3 contracts fell from the table and landed on the carpet below with a sound that was quieter than anyone expected, 3 soft impacts that somehow felt louder than anything that had been said. 9 men stared at 3 pieces of paper on the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air conditioning hummed. Somewhere outside, a camera on Stage 12 was rolling, completely unaware that 30 feet above the studio, the entire foundation of how Hollywood treated the people who made it rich was beginning to crack. Richard Holloway looked at the contracts on the floor for exactly 4 seconds. Then he looked up at the 3 women across the table with an expression that had cycled rapidly through surprise, confusion, and was now settling into the controlled irritation of a man who considers himself too important to be surprised by anything. He had been in this industry for 22 years. He had sat across from Clark Gable when Gable threatened to walk out of Gone with the Wind. He had negotiated with directors who threw chairs. He had handled every variety of talent tantrum that Hollywood had invented, and he had always, without exception, won. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on the table in front of him. "Ladies," he said slowly, "those are standard contracts. Same terms we offer everyone." Barbara Stanwyck reached into her leather folder and placed a document on the table where the contracts had been. It was 11 pages, single-spaced, and she had typed every word herself on the royal typewriter she kept in her study at her Bel Air home. She had been working on it for 3 weeks, cross-referencing box office records, studio financial reports, and compensation agreements she had spent years quietly collecting from trusted sources across every major studio in Hollywood. "This isn't about the terms you offer everyone," she said. "This is about the terms you should have been offering us." Holloway pulled the document toward him without picking it up, scanning the first page with the practiced speed of a man who reads contracts for a living. What he saw on that first page made him stop scanning and start reading. Column 1 listed 11 films produced by Paramount between 1951 and 1957. Column 2 listed the box office gross for each film. Column 3 listed the total compensation paid to the female lead of each film. The disparity between Column 2 and Column 3 was not a gap. It was a canyon. Audrey Hepburn's film Roman Holiday had generated $12 million for Paramount Pictures. Her total compensation for that film had been $12,000. Sabrina had generated $9 million. Her pay had been $15,000. The numbers continued down the page with the same relentless, undeniable arithmetic. One of the lawyers at the end of the table cleared his throat. "Miss Stanwyck, the compensation figures you're citing don't account for the studio's production costs, marketing expenditures, distribution overhead, or the substantial risk the studio assumes when greenlighting any production." Barbara looked at him with the patience of someone who has anticipated every possible response and prepared for all of them. "I know exactly what they don't account for," she said. "So, let me show you what I calculated after accounting for all of those things." She reached into her folder again and placed a second document on top of the first. After full production costs, marketing, and distribution, Paramount's net profit from films with female leads between 1951 and 1957 was $47 million. The total compensation paid to those female leads was $312,000. That means the women who generated your profits received less than 1% of what they created. The room was very quiet. Holloway's jaw was set in a hard line. Ava Gardner was watching him with dark, steady eyes. She had grown up watching her father work tobacco fields in Grabtown, North Carolina, working from before sunrise to after sunset for wages that bore no relationship to the value he created, told to be grateful for whatever he received because at least he had work. She had spent her entire adult life recognizing the same system, wearing different clothes. This was the same system, wearing a very expensive suit. Audrey Hepburn spoke for the first time since sitting down, and her voice was the voice of a woman who had learned English as her third language and chose every word in it with particular care. "Mr. Holloway, I want to show you something on page 11 of the contract you asked us to sign." She had memorized the page number weeks ago. She didn't need to open anything. Page 11, subsection C. The morality clause. She paused. "Would you like to read it aloud, or shall I?" Holloway's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. It was the shift of a man who has been hoping a specific subject wouldn't come up and has just realized it is coming up regardless of what he hopes. He said nothing. Ava reached across the table, picked up one of the contracts from the floor with 2 fingers as if retrieving something distasteful, and opened it to page 11 without looking at the page numbers. She had also memorized exactly where to find it. She read the morality clause in its entirety. Her voice was flat and clear and utterly without drama because the words themselves were dramatic enough without any assistance from her tone. The morality clause was 47 words long. Ava read all 47 of them without pausing, without inflection, without the slightest variation in her voice, the way you read something when you want every single word to land separately and be understood individually before the listener is allowed to move on to the next one. When she finished, She closed the contract and placed it back on the table in front of her, not on the floor this time, but directly in front of Richard Holloway, where he would have to look at it for the rest of the meeting. The clause stated that the studio reserved the right to void any contract without compensation if the contracted talent was deemed, at the studio's sole discretion, to have become reputationally inconvenient to the studio's commercial interests or public standing. Reputationally inconvenient. Not guilty of a crime. Not in breach of any specific behavior. Simply inconvenient. At the studio's sole discretion. Meaning no appeal, no arbitration, no definition of what inconvenient actually meant beyond whatever the studio decided it meant on any given morning. Audrey leaned forward slightly in her chair. "I want to understand something," she said. "If Paramount decides tomorrow that my personal life has become reputationally inconvenient, you can void my contract and pay me nothing for work already completed." Holloway started to respond, but she continued without raising her voice. "I grew up in Arnhem in the Netherlands during the Nazi occupation. I was 11 years old when German forces occupied my city. I watched people disappear from their homes because someone in authority decided they had become inconvenient." She looked at him with eyes that had seen things no child should see and had spent 20 years learning how to live with the memory of them. "I will not sign a document that gives any person or institution the right to erase me at their discretion. Not for any amount of money. Not under any circumstances." The lawyer at the end of the table shifted uncomfortably in his chair. One of the other executives was studying something on the table in front of him with intense concentration, as if hoping the mahogany grain might provide an escape route from this conversation. Holloway maintained his composure, but the effort it required was becoming visible around the edges, in the slight tightness around his eyes, in the way his hands had moved from folded on the table to flat on his thighs. "This is standard industry practice," he said finally. "Every studio uses this clause. Warner Brothers, MGM, Fox, Columbia, every single one of them. If you don't sign with us, you will find the same language in every contract in this town. You cannot escape it by walking away from this table." He said it with the confidence of a man playing what he believed was his strongest card, the reminder that the system was everywhere, that resistance in one room was meaningless when every other room contained the same walls. Barbara Stanwyck smiled. It was the particular smile of someone who has been waiting for a specific sentence and has just heard it. She reached across the table and picked up the telephone that sat on a credenza behind Holloway without asking permission, without explaining what she was doing, with the ease of a woman who has decided that asking permission for things in this room is no longer part of the arrangement. She dialed a number from memory and put the call on speaker before anyone could object. The phone rang twice. Then a woman's voice answered, clear and immediate, as if she had been sitting next to the phone waiting for it to ring. "It's the same here," the voice said. "Same clause, same arguments, same suits. Holloway said it's standard practice, and that we can't escape it." Barbara said, "Thank you, Katie." The voice on the phone said, "We're holding." The line went quiet but stayed connected. Every person in conference room A recognized the voice. Katharine Hepburn was currently sitting in a conference room at RKO Pictures on the other side of Los Angeles, apparently having a remarkably similar conversation. Holloway stared at the telephone speaker with an expression that was recalibrating in real time, the expression of a man who walked into what he believed was a negotiation and is only now understanding that it is something else entirely. Barbara dialed a second number. This time it took one ring. Grace Kelly's voice, precise and calm. "Same here. MGM's lawyers just walked in. We're not moving." A third call. Marilyn Monroe answered on the first ring, her voice carrying none of the breathy uncertainty that studios had spent years cultivating as her public persona. "Fox tried to suspend me 20 minutes ago," she said. "I told them to go ahead. I brought a book." Richard Holloway stood up from his chair and walked to the window overlooking the studio lot, the same way powerful men always walk to windows when they need a moment to think without showing that they need a moment to think. Below him, Stage 12 was still running, cameras rolling, crew moving with the efficient choreography of people who had done this work so many times that it had become muscle memory. 4,000 people worked on the Paramount lot every day. 12 productions were scheduled to begin this week alone. The summer release calendar was committed, advertised. already sold to theater chains across the country. Everything below that window depended on the three women sitting behind him staying in their chairs and signing those contracts. He turned around. "Barbara," he said, using her first name for the first time in the meeting, the shift from Miss Stanwyck a small concession that she noted and did not acknowledge. "Do you understand what you are asking me to do? These are not decisions I can make alone. These involve every studio in Hollywood, every production company, every contract player, every union agreement currently in place. You are asking me to dismantle a system that has been operating for 30 years. Barbara looked at him steadily. "I'm asking you to remove 47 words from a contract," she said. "You can do that with a pen in the next 30 seconds. Everything else is a conversation we can have afterward. But those 47 words come out today, or we don't sign today. It is genuinely that simple." Holloway picked up his telephone and dialed Jack Warner directly. He turned slightly away from the table as he did it, but Ava Gardner was sitting at the near end of the table, and the room was quiet enough that she could hear both sides of the conversation with perfect clarity. She kept her face completely neutral and her eyes on the window, and listened to every word. Warner answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular tension of a man who had been waiting for this call. "How many of them are actually refusing?" Holloway asked quietly. "All of them," Holloway answered himself, looking at the three women. "Every single one." Warner was silent for 4 full seconds, which was 4 seconds longer than Jack Warner was ever usually silent about anything. Then his voice came back quieter than before. "Which one organized it?" Holloway looked directly at Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara held his gaze without any expression at all. Holloway said nothing into the phone. He didn't need to. Warner's voice, almost to himself. "How did we not see this coming?" Holloway set the phone down without responding to the question because he didn't have an answer to it and he knew it. He sat back down at the table and pulled Barbara's financial analysis toward him. He read it properly this time, not scanning but reading the way he read documents when he was looking for a mistake, a miscalculation, something he could use to redirect the conversation onto ground he controlled. He didn't find one. The numbers were correct. He knew they were correct because he had signed off on the same production budgets and box office reports Barbara had used as her source material. He had just never seen them arranged in the same columns before, never seen the compensation figures placed directly beside the revenue figures in a way that made the relationship between what these women generated and what they received impossible to look away from. He looked at the 12 points on Barbara's second document. He read all of them. His chief legal counsel was sitting 2 seats to his right, and Holloway pushed the document toward him without comment. The lawyer read it in silence, turned it over to check if there was anything on the back, then looked at Holloway. "All of these are legally defensible," he said quietly. "None of them are unreasonable." Holloway said, "I know they're not unreasonable. That's the problem." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the words that none of the men in that room had ever expected to hear him say in any negotiation in his 22 years at Paramount. "What do you need from me to begin formal negotiations today?" Barbara reached into her leather folder one final time and placed a single page on the table. It was a letter of agreement, 1 paragraph, committing all 5 studios to formal renegotiation of standard contract terms with female talent, beginning within 30 days. At the bottom were 5 signature lines, 1 for each studio. The other 4 studios had already been called. Their representatives were waiting. Holloway read the paragraph twice. Then he picked up the pen that had been sitting on the table since the beginning of this meeting, the same pen he had expected to use to finalize 3 standard 7-year contracts before lunch, and he signed his name on the first line. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, all 5 studios had signed. By the end of the week, the morality clause had been removed from every active contract at every major Hollywood studio. By the end of the year, every one of Barbara's 12 points had been formally negotiated and agreed upon. The Screen Actors Guild expanded its female protections within 18 months. Equal pay provisions, image rights, script approval, production scheduling protections, retirement provisions, all of it written into binding agreements that would shape Hollywood for the next 7 decades. The 15 women who had held the line in 5 different conference rooms across Los Angeles that morning never held a press conference about what they had done. They never gave coordinated interviews. They never sought collective credit for an achievement that had required 6 months of secret planning, 12 late-night phone calls, and the courage to walk into rooms full of powerful men with nothing but the truth and the refusal to be alone anymore. Barbara Stanwyck gave one interview 17 years later in which she was asked about collective action in Hollywood. She paused for a long time before answering.
"We did what we had to do," she said.
Women have always done what they had to do. The difference is that this time, we did it together. That's all I'll say about it. Richard Holloway retired from Paramount in 1963. In a private letter discovered after his death, he wrote one paragraph about September 9, 1957. "I have negotiated with presidents of corporations, with senators, with foreign governments. I have never been as thoroughly outmaneuvered as I was that morning. The remarkable thing wasn't that they won. It was that they were right. And somehow in 30 years of making them feel powerless, we forgot to notice that they knew it. They didn't rule Hollywood by being louder than the men across the table. They didn't rule it by being harder or angrier or more ruthless. They ruled it by being smarter, more prepared, and more coordinated than anyone had ever given them credit for being. And by understanding the one thing their opponents had never managed to figure out. That power given to you by someone else can be taken away the moment that someone changes their mind. But power you build together, in late-night kitchens over cold coffee and spread-out contracts, power that belongs to 15 people at once, that is the kind of power that nobody can dismantle. Because to dismantle it, you would have to take it from all of them simultaneously. And on September 9, 1957, Hollywood finally learned what happens when you try.